What do the 58 Packers and criminal justice reform have in common? We may have found a link. You're confused. Okay, we'll clear it up for you. Coming up next, it's Mitchell Talks the News 9 Sessions with Aaron Tornado Brilbeck. So I was sitting at this gas station when a tornado came up.
When all of a sudden,
out
of nowhere.
Now we could talk about that. We probably do want to get that.
Let's touch on it just briefly.
Yeah, let's go ahead.
We got a minute.
Hello, Mr. Spino. We need to say hello to you.
It is
Mr.
great
Spino,
to
right
see
on
you,
crime.
gentlemen. I always wondered what the inside of a real TV station looks like. This is very exciting.
Now you know.
Yeah.
So quick tornado story.
There's a burn.
I felt the burn.
Yeah, I felt
First
the
the tornado, then the burn.
I felt the burn. It was so loud. Okay. Go ahead.
Quick tornado story. We were chasing. We were just kind of setting ourselves up for where there might be some damage. We're in El Reno. We stopped to get ourselves some Hostess cupcakes.
Is that where Payne sent you? Is it sit right there?
No, that
Okay.
was other people sent us there. But we sat there and we're waiting. There's no damage. There's no sign of any damage. No sign of any tornadoes coming. So we decided we're going to up and leave after a few minutes. And when we're just about to leave, the rain starts rolling in really hard. And when the rain started rolling in, we decided, well, we're just going to park for a second and let this rainstorm pass. And take a look at this.
We've got a pretty big help here, and again, not everybody is going to get the circulation, but this thing could wobble. It could wobble, so we better be safe than sorry, right? UFO 1027, Wiley Post, 11 o'clock, Ski Island, 11 o'clock.
And so that was a little bit more than just a rainstorm. We found ourselves right in the middle of that tornado that struck over in El Reno. It took out a hotel. It took out a mobile home park. Unfortunately, killed 2 people and sent about 24 to the hospital. So
Closest you've ever been to death in covering a story?
no, I'm married.
And he was attacked by
Very
a tiger
attacked.
once.
And I was attacked by a tiger too. Oklahoma wants to kill me.
Yeah, well, probably for good reason.
Yeah, I think you were closer on the tornado than the
I think
tiger.
the tornado was pretty
The
close.
tiger did what people generally do when they get around Brubeck and go, I don't mess with that. But, I was just, when it happened, it was hard to tell. It was just unbelievable that just happened at that time. I think David Payne said it's like a drill bit.
Yep.
Because it just came from nowhere.
Just like a drill press. It just came right down, and then as quickly as it was there, as it appeared, it disappeared. And you could see it in the video too. It hit really hard, and then it just disappeared.
It's like the old tag. You were in the scene, in the story.
In the scene, in the story.
Of course,
Okay.
the tragedy is all the open space there is out there. That's where it happened to hit. There's a cruel irony to that.
Yeah, and it was interesting too. Tornadoes fascinate me because you see so much damage, and then you see stuff that isn't even touched. For example, the motel that was hit, the entire office is gone. The walls on all 3 sides, the roof gone. But there's a refrigerator that's still in there, and I'll show you a picture of that real quick. Take a look at that. The refrigerator is still there. The door is closed. There are still magnets on the refrigerator, and there's still a note to somebody talking about what food is inside there taped to it. So it's able to not wipe out an entire building, but it doesn't take the note off of this refrigerator. And take a look at this one too. This is interesting. This is a shot from upstairs in the motel. Again, all of the walls are gone, the roof is gone, and you see hanging what's left of the closet a pair of freshly pressed pants that are still on the hanger.
Mother Nature's a mad scientist.
Just the weirdest thing. It
That
really
is
is.
weird.
But she doesn't mess with Aaron Brilbeck. Okay, so you want to get into that odd, Mr. Spino, you want to get into that odd introduction. Okay, so I'm reading about criminal justice reform, mostly on Twitter this week. And I'm seeing the postmortems, different groups that are talking about criminal justice reform. They're talking about the Dunnington-Eccles bill, and they're going, we didn't do anything else. I mean, Mother Jones does an article. I'm sure we have a gigantic Mother Jones readership here in Oklahoma. But the point is, a lot of people were doing that. Well, the reason we didn't win this year. Now, this goes on 3 years. We hit this with Dunnington last week. So here's the deal. 1958, the Green Bay Packers have 5 Hall of Famers on their roster, okay? They go 1-10-1. They've been losing all these years. They bring this guy in named Vince Lombardi. And what makes me think of this was Bart Starr died this past week, my first professional hero, the greatest quarterback of all time in the postseason, who was 5-1 in championship series against Brady 6-3. You figure out the percentages, and if I had a mic to drop, I'd do it. But the fact is, this is what happened to that team. They changed leadership. They won 5 championships. 5. And I'm watching, and nobody seems to be saying this. I'm not putting you on the spot here, okay? I'm just saying, after 3 years of people saying we're not getting anything done, you got to wonder, the people that are leading the effort on criminal justice reform, why is nobody saying, you know, we keep fielding this team. We've got the people wanting this. We've got more money than Croesus. We have all of these assets, and every year I hear the same refrain. Oh, but, well, we didn't make it. Isn't it time, perhaps, gentlemen, to discuss, maybe the head coach needs to be changed?
Well, we did change the head
Right.
coach, going from Governor Fallon to Governor Stitt. And while Governor Fallon certainly was a passionate advocate for reform, the impression I've gotten so far is that Governor Stitt is much more results-oriented. And he's getting pretty quick results. Now, would I give this last session an A+ for criminal justice reform? No, but I would not give it an F by any stretch either. The most significant bill that needed to pass in this session, House Bill 1269, which made State Question 780 retroactive, is the one that passed at the very last minute.
The Eccles-Dunnington bill.
The Eccles-Dunnington bill, and that one was going to have the single biggest impact on Oklahoma's inmate population. And it varies what the estimates are, but it's somewhere between 500 and 1,000. Coupled with that was an expungement process so that the felony is no longer on the record. And just to make it clear to everyone, this only applies to people who, if they were charged with a crime today, would not be facing prison time, the same crime, and people who have no violent history. So public safety was made paramount in this bill. It's a smart, effective way to get these people who are not really a threat in any violent way to society back into society.
Let me follow, because I see where I made an error. The management upstairs has changed, okay? But the coaches on the field have been there through 2 different governors, right? And I know people are going, what are you talking about? I'm saying something we ought to be talking about, which is there is a lot, the folks who've been running the show at the Capitol advocating for these changes, they're not getting it done. And I wonder why people don't want to talk about it.
Well, that's what I'm here for, is to talk about it today. Now, let's be clear that problems that take years to create take years to solve. That's only reasonable. And just for background purposes, my group, Right on Crime, advocates for conservative criminal justice reform, which means we, number one, prioritize public safety, and number two, look at public safety like a policy issue that should be analyzed with the best rate of return for the taxpayer.
And what you're saying is advocacy is not a monolith. There's not, all the advocacy groups are not joined at the hip. There are different advocacy groups.
There are several different, and they span the political spectrum, but we all work very well in this coalition because we all generally have the same policy goals. We might have different motives as to why we want to achieve them, but by and large, our policy goals are the same, and that is to safely reduce our prison population, and that has to include 2 factors. Number one, letting people out who are there now who don't represent a public safety threat, and decreasing the inflow of inmates into the system. That's what we were seriously hoping to address with the bills that addressed fines and fees and bail reform. Unfortunately, those bills did not pass.
Here's where I disagree with you. There's a third aspect of that also, and that's recidivism. And we're not addressing that. There's not much money being put in towards alcohol treatment, drug treatment, and psychological treatment. I think it's $10 million, $11 million. Is that enough? And are we just going to be, the people that we're releasing, is it a revolving door? We put them right back in again?
Now, the $10 million that you're talking about that was earmarked specifically for Justice Reinvestment Initiative through the complementary State Question 781, which was to take the money that we save from not putting people in prison and putting it into these programs. Drug and alcohol courts, veterans courts, mental health courts, taking people who need help, not punishment necessarily, and getting them back into society. Oklahoma's biggest problem is that we focus too much time incarcerating the wrong type of criminal. If somebody steals your lawnmower, you're absolutely a victim, and you should be compensated. The question is, should that person be in prison because of it, because they did it once? That's what we're trying to address. Oklahoma has a very draconian criminal code, and the idea behind it was sound, just like all of the tough on crime policies that we saw in the 90s. It was deterrence, that if I knew that I got popped with half a joint, I'm looking at 2 years of hard time, I'm not smoking marijuana anymore. Appeals to people's sense of reason, including mine at the time. It did not pan out in reality. And the clearest evidence of that is that our prisons are bursting at the seams today. So that is what would address recidivism. Unfortunately, there's a huge dispute between OMES and DOC over how much money has been saved. What is the resolution of that dispute? There is none so far. And until that is resolved, the bulk of the money that's supposed to go to the counties for those type of programs is not going to get there. That's something that needs to be prioritized, that can start to be worked on before next session, and hopefully will be permanently addressed during next session.
Would that be done legislatively though, or how would that work?
The state questions were statutory, they weren't constitutional, so the legislature has the right to tinker with them as needed. As far as resolving the dollar amount, if you can get an answer to that question, I'd love to hear it. Once we've reached a stalemate between two state agencies, who breaks the tie? There seems to be a question mark about that.
Okay, let me ask you this then. Because we know it's not a monolith, the advocacy is not a monolith, but the losing continues. I mean, we hear the people are for it, we want to get all this stuff done, but nothing seems to happen. What's going to change? What could change? Because you hope all this stuff changes and you get something done, but by the same token, the people that I'm reading this weekend saying, hey, we should have done this, we could have done this, we missed all this opportunity. I'm like, dude, you're the coaches. You got all the money, you got all this stroke allegedly, you got the people behind you, and it ain't getting done. There's some part of the brain ain't connecting here, and I'm saying, what in the world's going to change it?
I'll tell you where the real disconnect is. It's between the voters and the legislature. Right on Crime did polling in heavily conservative districts and found support for criminal justice reform in the 70 to 80% range among conservatives, higher among moderates and liberals. Now, why isn't that translating into legislation that addresses it? There are 1,000 different answers to that, but I would say the top one is competing interests. And if you've really boiled down to it, I believe the single greatest thing we can do to reform our criminal justice system is to properly fund district attorneys' offices on the front end. Criminal justice and corrections is a core function of government, and it should be properly funded. Instead, we have a system where district attorneys, through fines, fees, and a supervision probation program, which they do not want, they basically have to cobble together a budget just to make payroll. It's bad government. Not only is it inefficient and not particularly effective, it gives prosecutors a financial incentive to prosecute. And everything I'm saying, the District Attorney's Council agrees with. They don't want this anymore. They want to be properly funded. Now that for Right on Crime we were looking at that at like an 8-10 year goal. Governor Stitt wants to do that in 2 years and make a major step forward this year by increasing the funding to get us on the track to do that. Subsequently, things like fines and fees, supervision, those kind of things are really going to have to be addressed as the revenue is balanced out between what the legislature appropriates and what they need to supplement through their own fines and fees programs.
And the budget does increase the funding for district attorneys. Problem is, there's nothing in statute that says that they can't also impose these fines and fees.
That's part of the transition. Again, problems that take years to create take years to solve. It's not like you just flip a switch, or I guess a better analogy would be turn off the cold water and turn on the hot all in one sink. You can't do that when it comes to budget and money and distributing to 29 different district attorneys' districts. There's a transition time, and we're in that transition. I think what we should be optimistic about coming out of the last legislative session is that we passed the most significant bill we could have, House Bill 1269. We passed several other good bills, an expungement bill and an occupational licensing bill. What we need to go back to the drawing board on, and much of this will depend on how things pan out with the funding of the district attorneys, is fines and fees, probation and supervision, and sentencing and bail reform. And really the fifth one would be, it's called PWIB, possession with intent to distribute. Is setting up some very specific weights and measures and criteria for what determines when someone is distributing narcotics rather than simply possessing them.
Any messaging failures? You've already hit this disconnect between the voters and the legislature. Recall 3 years ago, there was a lot of press about this when Representative Biggs was in the House, right? Mm-hmm. Holding it in the way. You dig into this and you find out, you remember this.
I do.
There were advocates wanting to lessen penalties for strangulation. Now, Oklahoma Watch did a piece this last week about strangulation. It's like, okay, that got around, okay? This year, there was efforts to make the failure to protect laws weaker. So much that don't take my word for it, Joe Dorman's group, Oklahoma's Institute for Child Advocacy, said we can't do this. It's going to put moms and kids at risk. is there a disconnect between what the private agendas are with some of these advocacy groups and what the people really want? Because I've not met anybody who thinks that it's a great idea to lessen the penalties for strangulation or make it harder to protect children against abusers.
Let me address each of those individually. Now, on the domestic abuse by strangulation, that is not categorized by the state of Oklahoma as a violent crime.
Say that again for us.
Domestic abuse by strangulation is not classified in Oklahoma statute as a violent crime.
Which is crazy.
That is a statutory flaw easily fixed. The context in which former Representative Biggs was using it was that we were looking for sentencing reform for nonviolent crimes. The fact that that was incorrectly classified as a nonviolent crime should not have sunk the bill, and ultimately it did not sink the bill. But that's an easy fix. The other one that you brought up was child abuse, enabling child abuse. Should mothers who enable child abuse be given a free pass? No, no one's advocating for that. I think the disparity is in the fact that in many cases, there were women who did no abusing, but are serving longer sentences for enabling the abuse than the abuser is getting for the abuse. That's inherently unfair.
You know what that number would be?
I
Any
don't
idea?
off the top of my head.
Okay, I'm just curious because I've heard the very same thing. So anyway, wrap my piece up for you is there's a ton of messaging challenges, right?
It depends what you mean by messaging challenges. I mean, the messaging is pretty consistent across the board. Why we need these changes is abundantly clear, and I think the average Oklahoma voter understands it. As always, the problem with the Capitol is not necessarily the policy, it's not necessarily the process, it's the politics. There are competing interests. It's a finite pie, and everyone's looking to get the biggest possible slice, so there's competition for resources.
Well, there we go.
Thanks a lot.
Oh, thank you. This was
It's
great.
a tough deal. It doesn't take long. You know, people will be reading stuff on the web sometime soon. They'll think it's autism is caused by vaccinations.
Who knows?
I
what
mean,
might
you know,
happen.
you see one story happens and then it just runs. I'm like, okay. Thanks, Andrew, thanks very much for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate
And thank that you stay out of the way of the weather this weekend, will you?
I'll try my darndest.
Okay, I appreciate
Try
you.
my darndest.
All right, then thanks for watching Mitchell Talks, the News 9 Stations with Aaron Burlbeck, the unscathed Aaron Burlbeck. See this again at news9.com/yourvotecounts. Follow me on Twitter at Mitchell Talks.